Hello, BookTube. We're continuing on with our read-along of God is Not Great by Christopher Hitchens. This is a read-along that I'm doing with David Murphy over on his channel. I'll leave a link down below. And we're doing it in a slightly unconventional way because we're not doing a summary video, every week or at the end of the month. Instead, we're reading this book chapter by chapter on weekdays. So Monday through Friday, one chapter each day until we crawl our way through the book, until we run out of chapters. And today, we are up to chapter 10. On the tawdriness of the miraculous and the decline of hell. That is, the title of the book is about the tawdriness of the miraculous and the decline of hell. And it is another one, as you can tell from the title, it's not a focused chapter. It's another unfocused chapter. We've seen quite a few of them in this book so far, where Hitchens picks a general subject, whether it be inconsistencies in the Old Testament, inconsistencies in the New Testament, religious involvement in political affairs that have cost human lives, or in this case, religious showmanship. Again, the emphasis here is almost entirely on Christianity. It's the religious showmanship of miracles and how they shouldn't really convince you of anything, and how they largely are open, easily visible frauds in the present day. And this echoes the complaint that many so-called new atheists have had in the last 15 years, which is that all of these things that this omnipotent God of the universe had happen, he had happened long before there was any kind of mass communication, any kind of accurate videography, or any kind of scientific mean to verify what was happening. And that if this God really wanted to buttress faith with miracles, they would continue to happen. And they don't, even though they are explicitly promised. Jesus Christ specifically tells his followers, if your faith is strong enough, you'll be able to do, and then he gives a long list of things that they'll be able to do. No Christian can do those things. And any Christian, the standard Christian response, when you bring that up, that you can't turn the path of a hurricane, you can't cause a mountain to jump into the sea, you can't do any of these things. When the standard Christian response when someone brings that up is that, well, my faith just isn't strong enough. Okay, all right, well, and that's not a very good dodge, because that would, by implication, you would have to be saying that no Christian on earth has a strong enough faith anywhere. And plenty of Christians that I've talked to on this very point say, well, that is the case. Our faith is imperfect. That's the whole point of Christianity. And I say to them, well, but what about the explicit promise? Okay, it's a great idea to say your faith is imperfect and that's the whole point of Christianity, but there's an explicit promise being made by someone who you think is God. And you're saying that your faith is impure. And that by implication, the faith of the people that he was making that promise to directly, their faith was stronger. And you say, of course, they were disciples, they were apostles, of course their faith was stronger. But you don't have any weaker faith than Peter's, who denied that he even knew Jesus, much less that Jesus was anything else. Now, his faith was redeemed, but not when Jesus made that promise. When Jesus made that promise, Peter was still as fallible as mud, and so were all the other apostles. I don't think there's any way around it. I don't think there's any way around the fact that Christianity in its founding documents makes promises that it very visibly does not keep in the present day. And the best response that I've had from, I've known many Christians, and I love talking to them, and as I've mentioned before, I mentioned long before we were doing this read-along, the best people that I've known in my life have been Christians. And there is, I think, an element of the miraculous in their faith. But it is a very personal miracle. It is not faith healings under a tent in the Louisiana heat. It is not that. And the Christians that I've talked to on the subject, most of my favorite ones to talk to over the years, have said that they don't place their faith in miracles. Miracles are not designed to create faith. They're designed to underscore faith. Now, that's a wonderful reading. I don't believe that reading holds up when you go back to the documents to the New Testament that actually shows these miracles happening. Jesus clearly intends them to instill faith. He clearly does not intend them to underscore an already existing faith. He clearly means them to create faith. That, look, your life didn't have any miracles. I am now doing a miracle. I am the Son of God. I am the one standing in front of you. I have said this. I think that's clearly the case, but the Christians that I've talked to have said, well, the faith evolves. Gotta love that. It's not falsifiable, but it is mighty firm grounding, and it pretty much has to be. as Hitchens points out in this chapter, I mean, he doesn't explicitly say it quite so often, although I will read you a passage in which he does rather well say it explicitly. But he doesn't often. He mostly leaves the silly events that he describes to speak for themselves. But the point that is implied in this chapter, and that he implies over and over again in the course of the book, is that you'd better not put your faith in miracles or the divine, because there is no evidence. There is copious evidence to the contrary. People don't cure leprosy with a touch. People don't cure the blind with a touch. Follow-up studies, no matter what you want, no matter how you want to do it. The kids, the people, the old people who are brought, you can see endless hours of video on YouTube, who are brought to some high-talking, hysterical faith healer up on a stage, and that faith healer slaps their hand or slaps their face or knocks them over, and suddenly they are cured, and they can walk unaided out of the auditorium. Follow-up studies, whenever they're done, show that those people are not cured. They are not cured. They are caught up in the hysteria of the moment, but they are not cured. Some of them are obviously visually not cured even in the moment. You can't put your faith in that. You might raise questions as to why that doesn't still happen. There's no good argument in Christian terms as to why that does not still happen. According to the doctrines not of St. Paul and not of any church fathers, but of Jesus himself, ardent believing Christians should be able to deflect the laws of nature. On a regular basis, they should be able to do that on the strength of their prayer, and they can't. They absolutely can't. Because we know what the laws of nature are now, and cameras are watching. And under those two burdens, it just does not work. And you might, again, the Christians that I've talked to have said, well, that may be so, but we don't put our faith on that. Our faith doesn't come from that. Our faith comes from within. Okay, fine. That's great. But it should be possible. That we should be seeing that. Hitchens makes much here in this chapter of how there are no great miracle workers anymore, and he also says there are no great theologians. When he was writing that chapter, when he was writing that sentence of this chapter, there are no great theologians left in the world, I would have challenged anyone to walk up to him while he's drunk at his typewriter and say, can you name a living theologian? Even one. Can you name even one? You can't. So you don't know if there are any great ones or not. You just don't have any idea what you're talking about. He refers to this chapter again to Bart Ehrman, who has been going by the name Bart Ehrman since he was in preschool. And yet in this chapter, Hitchens refers to him as Barton Ehrman, just to give him some sort of, often in this book, Hitchens tries to reflect the hoity-toity, plummy, upper-class British visitor. Who he doesn't do it well. It's a weird Bertie Wooster Manquet performance that he does. That I still refer back to that horrible, oily passage that we read a week ago, about how when he's not arguing with the religious, he attends agreeable conferences. That was not Christopher Hitchens, and neither is Barton Ehrman, Christopher Hitchens. He tries to do that again throughout this chapter, although in this chapter at least he refers to himself as an ardent correspondent, as a lifelong news chaser, rather than the description in that earlier passage that he usually is attending agreeable conferences, eating sandwiches with the crust cut off with his pinky in the air, but that every once in a while he's dragged to a war zone. He went wherever there was a high chance that he could get a great headline and not get shot at. But he does that in this chapter too. There's a study to be made of Christopher Hitchens, the man, running through this book. People don't ever do that. They instead concentrate on what they consider to be just a summary execution case against organized religion, when, as we've seen in this read-along, this book is not that. There are far better systematic dismantlings of organized religion. If you think that's a worthwhile goal, there are far better books to do it. This is just a Hitchensonian performance piece on that subject. And the passage that I want to read you is another one along those lines. I've read a few of them to you, where Hitchens he'll be bouncing around on his subject. In this case, how bleeding statues or anything like that can easily be duplicated. They are obviously the works of charlatans. He makes reference to, glancing reference, something he could have done much greater length on, the vast cult of relics and miracle sites during the Middle Ages and even up into the modern day, all throughout Europe, all throughout in Italy and Greece and whatnot. The adolescence of Christianity is absolutely full of such things. Hitchens makes reference to the splinters of the true cross, which added all together would make a cross that was 100 feet tall. And he doesn't credit where he gets that, but that's okay. Most people don't. That, of course, is from Erasmus, who hated the whole idea of the selling of indulgences. He hated the idea of relics and miracle sites, and he often railed about them in very, very funny terms. And he's the one who said, if you put together all these splinters, you get a cross that's too big to nail a person to. And he went on and on about other things too. Erasmus was a perfect sniffer out of obvious pig bones used as finger joints of an apostle or something like that. He hated, and he was religious his whole life. He hated the idea that anybody could reduce religion to that kind of three-card Monty bunkum. So this kind of indignation is not new to new atheists. Hitchens himself pointed that out, that we just happen to be current, but these objections have been around for a long time. I'm not sure off the top of my head if Erasmus even gets mentioned in this book. It'd be a shame if he didn't, since he was right there along the whole time. But I want to read you this passage because not only because I think it's well put, but because it also has a little gesture in the direction of the fake Christopher Hitchens. There's a fake version of himself that he's putting forward throughout this book. That plummy attender of agreeable conferences is one of them. Someone who thinks that a writer and scholar who has gone his whole life by the name Bart Ehrman should be called Barton Ehrman, because I don't want to presume, because we don't presume when we're from the upper crusts or whatever. And he does the same thing here in this chapter. There's a great deal to be learned and appreciated from the scrutiny of religion, and one often finds oneself standing atop the shoulders of distinguished writers and thinkers who were certainly one's intellectual and sometimes even moral superiors. Many of them, in their own time, had ripped away the disguise and idolatry and paganism, and even risked martyrdom for the sake of disputes with their own co-religionists. However, a moment in history has now arrived when even a pygmy such as myself, Hitchens did not think of himself as a pygmy. Okay, that is just a lie. Even a pygmy such as myself can claim to know more through no merit of his own, and to see that the final ripping of the whole disguise is overdue. Between them, the sciences of textual criticism, archaeology, physics, and molecular biology have shown religious myths to be false and man-made, and have also succeeded in evolving better and more enlightened explanations. The loss of faith can be compensated by the newer and finer wonders that we have before us, as well as by immersion in the near-miraculous work of Homer and Shakespeare and Milton and Tolstoy and Proust, all of which is also man-made, though one sometimes wonders, as in the case of Mozart. And for me, I would substitute Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach. When I listen to his music, I find it hard to believe that a human conceived of it. But a human very definitely did, and we know that for an absolutely demonstrable fact. I can say this one as one whose own secular faith has been shaken and discarded, not without pain, and that leads him to a digression about how his youth-long infatuation with Marxism, which he equates with a religious faith, and which he had to discard when he outgrew Marxism. I find that bit interesting. I wouldn't be surprised at all, for obviously natural reasons, if David found that more fascinating than I do. But that pretty much concludes this chapter on the tawdriness of the miraculous and the decline of hell. And we move on to chapter 11 will be on Monday, and chapter 11 is, the title is called The Lowly Stamp of Their Origin, Religion's Corrupt Beginnings. And the lowly stamp of their origin is a quote from Darwin. So if we don't know anything more about the chapter, you might think, okay, now we're going to start to get into some science. And we shall see. Hitchens is often very, very iffy on science. He understands it even less than he understands religion, and never admits that. Never admits it at all. He makes faux Lord Peter Wimsey gestures at how, I know virtually nothing. I am a trained layman. But he didn't think that. And it didn't stop really to pay much attention to what he was talking about before he just got the gist of it and moved on. And maybe there are people who would say, okay, that is the primary strength of a polemicist. They don't linger on details because they're not trying to enlighten or entertain or instruct. They're trying to convince and arouse. Okay, if that's the case, that's fine. I think Hitchens would probably have disagreed with that characterization, but I might agree with it. But anyway, we're going to move on to that chapter, to chapter 11, on Monday. So you get the weekend off to cogitate and catch up. And I will see you, we will return to Hitchalong 2019 on Monday. Thank you, Book 2.